You've heard of the year ahead spread, but what about a year behind spread? In this video, I'm going to go over a spread that I came up with a few years ago that was one of my more popular posts back when I was on Instagram. I'm going to walk you through this particular spread and also talk about how I incorporate this spread into my end of year review practices as well as my year ahead practices. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. I want to start off this video just with a little FYI/apology. It honestly took me forever to set this up for you, and I realized that it is not a perfect viewpoint. You can't see the tops of some of these cards, but I had to move around some of my setup and turn things around. You may be able to hear that I'm kind of out of breath. And you know what? I just decided to go ahead and film because I want to, and this is my reality with long COVID and some of the issues that I've had. I just don't have a whole lot of lung capacity, and so hope you'll forgive me for that. I don't think it should affect anything about the content or the quality of the video. I want to talk just a little bit about kind of the practices and where this particular spread fits in for my practice. Then we'll go over the spread itself. We'll do a quick review of the positions so that if you're somebody who just wants to have it all in one place, that'll be time-stamped for a quick and easy reference. And then I'm actually going to walk you through some of what I pulled this year at the end of 2023, both as a kind of part of my own little like year-end review video for folks who are curious, but also with the purpose of kind of giving you some ideas about how you can work with these kinds of cards and what do you do if they're cards in, whether it's a spread like this that's referring to the past, whether it's the future. Sometimes you're going to have cards you don't really know what to do with, and then how you might like practically work with this and combined with other practices, like maybe working with tarot year cards, for example, if you do that. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about review practices. So if you didn't already see this, I'll try to remember to leave a card. I recently did a video on this channel about my end of year practices, and I like to incorporate a few different elements. I like to look at reflection, review, ritual, and planning. And when I'm doing these processes, these practices, I walked through kind of at a high level in that video some of the things that I like to think about, especially as an ADHD person. But I didn't go into depth in any of my like tarot and astrology practices. And so I thought it would be cool to show you this one because I think it's a little bit unique. Like I said, this was one of the posts that I did back when I was on Instagram, where I was surprised by how many people were into it. I think even before I had a business. I think it was like 2018, 2019. I posted this spread, and I posted it every year after that, but I don't have Instagram anymore. I'm not on social media, so I thought it'd be fun to do a little YouTube walkthrough of the spread. And this is something that I like to use so that I can reflect on my current year that's wrapping up before I jump into a year ahead spread, before I jump into going forward. I think sometimes we want to jump into the like planning for the next year, and it's important, particularly in a culture that sometimes doesn't emphasize celebration, gratitude. Like we talk a lot about analysis and data, but not necessarily the kind of reflection energetically on what the year's brought us, where we are as we're moving into the new year. And so I find that doing this year behind spread gives a little more balance and a little more like weight on each side of that portal of going into the next year than just doing a year ahead spread. I do also at this time usually reflect on my last year's year ahead spread. And part of why I started doing these catalyst readings is because I did notice that, I do work with my monthly, the information that I get from that beginning of year spread monthly. But, I think you gotta be realistic about time. And a lot of times when you get to this point, right, you can't remember January. And so this particular spread, it does have a little bit of a reference to seasons, but it's not as detailed in terms of like each month. I will just tell you, in case you're curious or you're looking for this in your own practice, what I tend to do is I'll do this spread to reflect on the year that's passed. I will take a look at my kind of skim through usually more like the season cards rather than the months, but I'll kind of skim through my journal of what I've done each month. And then what I do for going forward and how that journal gets developed is that I use Lindsay Mack's spiral head spread, which I believe, I don't know yet because it hasn't been released, but usually that spread is in Lindsay's Threshold offering, which you can check out if you're interested, from Lindsay Mack, if you want to do that course. But that's a little like year portal thing that Lindsay does, and it includes a spread. And so I've just been using that spread every year for 5 or so years. But it's got some, additional cards, additional positions, but it does include a card for each month and a card for each season. And the way I work with it is that I consider those to be, I believe it was Alexis J. Cunningfolk had this term of like your solar card and your lunar card, and that the solar card was like the ones that you would pull at the beginning, all at once, and then the lunar card you would pull like in the moment. And so that's what I do, is I use those cards that I pulled for each month and each season in advance, but I also, at the new moon for this season, and I do the months by the moons, not by like January, February, it's like new moon in Scorpio. But when the moon happens, part of my new moon practice is that I do pull a card at that moment, because I think that grounds it in the energy of what's here. Particularly when you get towards the end of the year, whatever you pulled for November, in January might not make any sense, or, it might, but it's like, how do you blend the two? And so I'll pull a card at the moment, and then I pull an oracle card to help me integrate and like blend those energies. So that's what I'll be doing, in a couple of weeks, and I won't be videoing that since that is Lindsay's spread, but I'll be doing that to figure out, what my year ahead looks like. I think of it less like a prediction though, and more like, what are some like energies I might attune to, and then when I get there, the lunar card is really about like what is here, and then I'll reflect at the end of the month that's passed on how those cards showed up for me. And so when I get to this point, I'm probably not going to look at every single card in every single month, but I'll look at the kind of overall pattern of the year. The other spread I really like to use is it was Kittens, Weights, and Tarot on YouTube. At one point did this spread called the Hero's Journey spread, and I really liked that. It wasn't designed as a year ahead practice, but I think it was part of a tarot, what do you call them? Like not a challenge, but a tarot-thon, I think, or something thon. I can't remember what they called them, but like where there's a different tarot tuber every hour doing a video. I think it was part of one of those a few years ago. And this spread was just like a hero's journey, and it has positions like the departure and the quest and trials and things like that. And I realized that arc worked really well because there were 12 cards to kind of assign them to each month and to pull it at the beginning of the year with the intention that it's like, what do I need to know about like the unfolding kind of journey that I'm on this year? And so I will also work with that. So that's just a little like contextualization. And then, like I said, I really like the year card as an anchor point for the entire year. And that's something you calculate numerologically. And if you get a catalyst reading, I'll include that in the reading, but you can easily find out online how to calculate. So this is the year behind spread, and I'll just walk you through the positions. Excuse me. So the layout here, you could certainly adapt a little. I had to like scoot these cards together and condense a little part of my whole like setup that I mentioned at the beginning, and trying to get this filmable, and I hope like shadows and stuff are okay. Just some stuff has moved around, and I had to change it up. So normally this would be like a little more spread out. I would have like the 4 middle cards, one above, one below. These cards would be kind of off to the, these 2 cards would be off to the side. I typically have them kind of in line a little bit above the 4. And then these cards that you can only probably see the bottom half of, these 4 cards at the top would be more sort of towards the corners. So if you wanted to lay it out the way I do, that's just like a little more space. But the positions are as follows. So this central card, if it was arranged the way I normally do, it would kind of be in the center of the table. This is the lesson of the year. And then I pull the lesson of each season. So this would be spring, summer, winter, spring, summer, autumn for the year that we're wrapping up. I typically do this around December, and so it works well to have winter be the beginning of the list. And then the cards on the sides, I do, actually, let me first tell you that this bottom card is what this year, this is what I pull next. So I do lesson of this year, lesson of each season, what this year has planted in my subconscious. Then I will pull the cards on the sides, the cycle I started this year, the cycle I completed this year. Now you may be wondering, that order might seem backwards to you, and if it makes more sense to your brain, feel free to flip it. If it feels like you want to do completed and then started because you're thinking like, well, you complete and then you start. However, I like this order because I think it acknowledges the overlapping cycles, that when I'm asking what cycle I started and completed, I'm not necessarily assuming that, you know, I completed the cycle and then I started it, right? I completed it like at the beginning and then I started it. There may be a lot of overlap. And so I like the idea of saying like, I'm starting something and then, you know, with this card, and then I'm probably still in this energy that I'm wrapping up as this one's coming in. It works well with like, I also just really like plant metaphors. So, you know, it's like what's gestating, what's growing, what's dying. It's like, it doesn't happen in a linear fashion. So I think this kind of acknowledges that. It makes me think of like eclipse cycles as well, and the way that eclipse signs like overlap, the stories overlap. So again, that's the cycle I started this year, cycle I completed this year. And then the cards at the top, I have what I still need to process from this year, an angle I haven't considered on this year's biggest challenge, which I usually like to think before I pull that card what I'm thinking about when I say this year's biggest challenge. If nothing comes to mind, then I might have that be more like what I haven't considered to be this biggest year's challenge, or like, you know, an angle I haven't considered in terms of what is the challenge. That might happen if I'm not sure, but if I know something, then I try to think of it ahead. So I'm asking about a specific challenge. And then the medicine of the year, gift of the year. So that's the basic idea. I'll say those without any commentary one more time, just so you get it. Lesson of this year, lesson of each season, what this year is planted in my subconscious, cycle I started this year, cycle I completed this year, what I still need to process from this year, an angle I haven't considered on this year's biggest challenge, medicine of the year, and the gift of the year. So that is my original year behind spread. And now I'm going to just briefly talk you through what I pulled this year. And while I'm doing so, kind of give you a sense of how I actually use this and how I think about these positions. So if you just want to go ahead and stop the video here and do your own, that's totally fine. Let me know how it goes. Leave me a comment. And let me know, do you do, you know, reflection practices like this as part of your tarot practice? Do you ever pull cards? Do you ever pull cards in general for like reflecting on the past? Because I do think this practice, it makes me think of the way I work with astrology, where I don't do a lot of prediction, but I actually do a lot of using astrology backwards. Like I look at the cycles and what I know happened, and then like, how does that relate to the astrology? I use a tarot very similarly, where it's like, I know what happened, but now I want to pull cards to kind of process what happened. It reminds me a lot of like working with a therapist or coach, where it's like, it's showing you things you might not have noticed about how you're seeing the situation, what might have been present in the situation. And I think it's interesting because Spirit has more information, like more information in the sense of there are things that have unfolded now and emerged in the physical world that that you know about, that Spirit knows about, and so now you can have a conversation about them. It's not that I don't think Spirit has access to information about the future. I don't think time is that linear, but it's a very different experience asking questions about what hasn't happened yet, And sometimes what comes into play is like our expectations, our hopes, and so the cards can be more about like what we're hoping or what we're expecting or what we're afraid of. I think when we go backwards, sometimes the cards intentionally are about like showing us how we felt about the situation. But I think that can be sometimes more useful going backwards. Like sometimes I find that getting a little guidance from spirit about how I'm seeing what already happened is more useful than getting guidance from spirit about what I'm freaking out about. Although that's not always true. And actually when I do future oriented spreads, a lot of times that is what I ask rather than asking what's going to happen. It's like, what am I afraid is going to happen? So anyway, that's a little of my orientation. Love to hear in the comments your thoughts. But if you don't want to hear about my year, then you can stop now. So yeah, what I pulled this year. So my lesson was the Magician. By the way, this deck is the Curious Travelers. I think it's Travelers because this is what that card is. Curious Travels. It's Travels. Curious Travels tarot deck. So hopefully you can see this. I can't see the screen that I'm showing you, so hope one of these angles is correct. But this is the Magician. And this is a great example of where I pulled a card and I did not immediately know what the hell it was about. So a lot of times when I work with clients, it'll be like, oh, like tarot can be kind of hard for me because I'll pull a card and I'll get in my head and I'll have anxiety and I'll be nervous about what does the card mean. And one of the things I often say is that even if you know the card meanings back and front, which I pretty much do at this point, although they're always evolving, always learning more, I think you can easily pull a card that I know what the Magician means to me. That's not the lesson I expected for this year. So it's kind of like interesting to be like, huh, Magician. I also think this is an interesting Magician card because the figure is kind of like almost like melancholy. It's like a weirdly melancholy Magician. But yeah, so when I think about this year and like what the lesson is, I think the thing that really stood out to me about the card, because initially I was like, oh, I don't really feel like in my power in that way, or I don't really feel like things were like flowing in that way where it was like boom, 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 I got all my resources. But I'm reminded that that the Magician energy is kind of fleeting. Like often it's like stuff comes through the Magician's channel and then it's there and then like that was the moment. So I often feel like the Magician is not a very sustained energy. It's something where it's like it's that moment of like catalyst and forward momentum that is not necessarily like forever consistent. It makes me think actually, it's card number 1 in the Major Arcana. It makes me think about in human design how the individual circuit, and you don't have to know anything about human design, don't worry, but I'll just say that there's something called the individual circuit, and in that circuit the energy, the format energy of that circuit is this on and off pulse. It's this like the channel of mutation. It's this like here's the boom, now we're moving, and then there's nothing, and then it's a boom, and then there's nothing. And the challenge of that energy is obviously it's hard to like sit around and be like, okay, when's the thing gonna happen? It's a lot like if you think about a gestating seed. And the gestating seed, you don't know when it's going to spring forth. And again, like you're thinking a lot back to like anxiety about the future. You're thinking about like, when is it going to do? What can I do? How can I plan? And in a lot of ways, it's like the way the Magician can prepare is by like gathering the resources and like having the tools and like being ready for when the thing comes through. But the Magician doesn't normally know when that's going to happen. And so thinking about that energy, I think when I think about my 2023, something that I notice is that there was a lot of this like feeling of, what's going to happen? How can I control it? How can I plan it? There were like really specific points where I made big decisions. I made a decision in the spring to let go of the vision of my business that was, this is going to be a full-time venture. I'm going to trust spirit. It's going to grow gradually the way it is. And I just know that I'm going to come into abundance and I'm going to be able to care for myself. I'm going to rely on other people. I'm not going to just like try to rely independently. Had all these like hopes and dreams, and they were beautiful, and there was a beautiful way of like moving into a very different way of being. And And I made a decision. I realized it was causing me so much anxiety to be in that state of flow, that it wasn't a state of flow, that nothing was flowing, because like I was having trouble with flowing, and my health was getting worse, and not having like reliable access to healthcare was like freaking me out, right? So there's just a lot of stuff that was building up over this year, where in the spring I made this decision where I was like, okay, I'm gonna look for a job, I'm gonna look for a part-time job, I'm gonna change. There's a lot of like changing the way I was thinking about my life, my identity, my sense of my like financial situation, deciding that I was going to that I was going to have some financial goals that would allow me to live independently if I had to. Even though interdependence is totally my goal, it's totally my present reality. But I was feeling this fear, this sense of trappedness, this restrictions because of COVID, and like not even being able to build interdependence. And it just felt right to say, okay, I'm gonna like release this vision and I'm gonna lean into something different. And it was funny because I think after that made a decision, I put a lot of like energy into looking, like being up late looking for jobs, trying to figure out what the next thing was and trying to predict it and trying to plan it. And it just like that wasn't happening. And what's interesting about this is that it's also been a hanged, or I like to call it suspension, but you're probably familiar with the card, the Hanged Man. I'm going to call it suspension. I was in a suspension year. And so thinking about a suspension year personally, as this like uncomfortable waiting and this cocoon time and this gestating seed and this like hanging upside down in a way that is restorative and important, but also really uncomfortable. Being in a place where like my health was really bad for the first time in a long time, and having to go through all these spirals of thinking I was getting better, and then I wasn't getting better, and then I was getting worse, and so much like unpredictability and things that basically meant that I could not like push forward. I couldn't push my business forward. I couldn't push my search for a job forward. I had like sort of some shame around. So I can actually start talking about these cards too, but and actually the funny thing is I cannot find the dang guidebook for this deck. So I don't know what the Traveler's card actually means. So I can only interpret it intuitively right now. I think it could be the World card, but I'd have to go through all 78 and figure out what's missing or whether that's an extra card. So I don't know. If you know, put it in the comments if you have this deck. Tell me what the heck this card is. But for now, I'm just going to like interpret it by looking at it. So like, in the winter time, it was a place of also like reconciling with like my mental health being bad and what that meant, and my like having to make different decisions about my mental health that were like hard and scary. Having to reconcile with some things that I had lost. So like when I look at this card, the Travelers, even though I don't exactly know what it is, and there are these people who are kind of like, it almost looks to me, these look like planets, and it almost looks to me like they're, oh yeah, because there's a moon here. Yeah, so they're like, it's like they're hanging a mobile of planets. It reminds me a lot, actually, of the Eight of Pentacles, although I assume that's not what that is. But it's like they're orchestrating something. And so I think about like the desire to orchestrate something, the desire to like pull something together. Then in the spring, I went home. Home is in like home of origin. Went to North Carolina for the first time in several years. It's very funny in retrospect because I went a lot longer later in the year. But I was thinking to myself like, wow, like I haven't been home in so long. This is a big deal. I haven't flown. I'm scared about flying, but like I need to do it. My parents are getting older. I can't wait 10 years to see my parents. So like I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna spend 3 weeks at home. And I did that in May. And my energy totally changed. It was very springy. And it's funny that this card is very springy, but this is the Four of Wands reversed. So it had this real sense of joy, of, blooming, of like moving into something. And so this was where the Magician energy for me, I think, started to flow. I started to feel connected to my channel again. I started to like want to write more. I like actually had physical energy. This was the brief part of the year where I had physical energy, was that card. So like, April, May, where I was like, wow, things are actually like, I'm wanting to write, I'm wanting to work. So I started planning this workshop. I started planning this ingredients of astrology workshop on the energies of the signs. And I got excited about what's coming out. And then I got back to the Pacific Northwest, and it was like things started to fall apart again. It was, the shame of like doing my first workshop push, having this vision in my head of what it would look like. And then, a lot of times I think in life and business, we, even if we don't have a very linear plan, I think we often can fall into this kind of, here's the ingredient that will move things forward. So if you think about the Magician card and like pulling in your resources, it's like, if I get this, I don't know, chemical for the formula, if I get this wand, then everything will work, right? In my case, if I get this, like, if I have a live workshop, like, that's the answer I've been looking for. That's the thing that's going to catalyze everything. And, it was hard to like go through that experience. Had two people, thank you to those two people, but two people signed up. It was like 2 days before the workshop, and I had to make a decision. And I could have sat with, I could have like crossed my fingers, but I was just like, I can't, if nobody else signs up, I can't go through that, like showing up for two people and being like, having this rejection sensitivity, and also having this feeling of like, oh my God, I said I was giving people an interactive workshop. There's only 2 of them. What will it be like? So like, it basically, I was so excited about the ideas of the workshop. It was actually like spending a lot of time with those ideas. And it felt very magician-y in the sense of like things coming through, but nobody, not nobody, but, not the container I thought there was going to be to share. And so, I refunded a couple of folks their money, canceled the workshop, and I kind of fell back into this cocoon. And then over the summer, this is the 7 of Swords. Over the summer, I can totally feel that like traditional 7 of Swords vibe of like looking over your shoulder. That's not what you see here, but you do see that the swords are kind of over the fox's eyes. This sense of like, what has been left on the table. I made the decision about my business. I made the decision to look for a job. So I'm like moving ahead, with the new, swords, like new perspective, new ideas, new story of what things are going to be. And at the same time, I'm feeling a lot of like grief and frustration about all the workshop ideas I have that now that I thought it was just like, just do it. And then you can just do pop-up workshops every month. And now I'm like, shit, I don't think I have a big enough list to sell workshops. I don't know, like stories. I guess I can't do workshops. Well, shit, but people wanted workshop, but was it the scheduling? Was it, so all this like information that you can't have. And then having to fall back into trust and having to energetically be like, okay, I have to trust. It's just not time yet. It's just not like, who knows why? Doesn't really matter why. You're not going to know. You're not going to be able to analyze it. You just have to keep going. And so the summer was, a time where I came back, the mold in my home, I think it was that. Could have just been long COVID. But my symptoms were getting worse and worse. But I was spending a lot of time outside. And, I was enjoying it because I had to, because I couldn't breathe inside. So I'd like go outside for a while to catch my breath. And like, so there were these like moments of light, but then also a lot of fear, a lot of stress, a lot of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And towards the end of the summer, as you may know, if you've been paying attention to this channel, or if you subscribe to my newsletter, which you can do that below, I made this very like spur of the moment decision because I found out that the mold issue could not be remediated until the beginning of the fall, until October. And I was like, funnily enough, till there was an eclipse in my 4th house. And I was like, well, my health is like getting worse and worse every day. And it's like really actually scary. It's heart stuff. It's lung stuff. So I called my dad and I said, hey, Daddy, I love you. How do you feel about a house guest for 3 months? And he said, if it's you, I feel great. I said, well, you're in luck. So thanks to my dad being awesome, he took in his wayward 38-year-old child for 3 months, and my mom a little bit as well. Spent some time with her as well. But yeah, I went home, and you know, so this card really like makes me think of, it's funny because it's like this energy that I had in North Carolina actually did come back. And there were some really lovely things about North Carolina. And so I think about, it's like, yeah, the idea of what I wanted the summer to be, the idea of like, oh, I gotta put everything on hold again because like I can't do certain things when I'm in a different time zone. I don't know what's happening. And it was like, shit, I want to get a job, but like, can I get a job? I don't know, because if I get a job, can I do the job from here? Like, my dad doesn't have very good internet. So it was like all this stuff. But the reality was, I think, very much that like the 5 swords that I had were good swords. And what I noticed was that there was a lot of more emergence happening. You know, I started having folks show up for explore calls for the first time in a long time, talking to new people. Got my website. If you haven't seen it, by the way, I haven't mentioned it on YouTube, but I have a new website and I love it. And a really cool little like metaphor in my one-on-ones page. Check it out. It's like a whole sea themed thing. I really enjoyed that. Like I enjoyed like that creativity. I enjoyed exploring. I enjoyed, you know, being able to just like play with, you know, I guess like changing my perspective on marketing, where it was like, yes, I was doing certain things to try to, ironically, to try to like make my business more conducive to people knowing what I was selling and to be able to sell offerings, even though I was also moving away from the full-time business, you know, hope. But the energy I was bringing to it was very different. And then it was like, oh, what's this like metaphor about sea creatures that I can bring to selling, right? It was like, there was a sense of play because I had taken the pressure, I think, off of the business to be my sole income. The irony that was not that shocking, honestly, was that taking that pressure off meant there could be more growth and emergence. And back to this magician is the lesson for the year. Like, I think could make space for things happening, sparking in the moment, for like curiosity, for opportunities, for just like, oop, now it connects. But all I can do is prepare my elements, my resources, and like trust that the thing will come through at the time. It's also a very human design generator. It's like, okay, I'm going to respond in the moment. And so some of the things that have come through, which I'm not going to tell too many details because I actually don't know what I'm allowed to share, but I'll just say that like, I had a really serendipitous opportunity come through in the fall that was not something I expected. It kind of related to my previous job, but was a like cool group of people to work with. It was an exciting thing. I got some income, but also it was like a one-off thing that, knock on wood, very well may translate into something a little longer term in 2024. Very likely, again, knock on wood, but very likely it's going to be something that is, you know, provides a little more foundation, a little more base for me. And I think means that this work that I love, that I fucking love, right? Love hanging out with y'all, love working with people one-on-one, love doing YouTube, love doing blogs, you know, all the stuff I do. Really, really, really love it. But it's like, yeah, taking some of that pressure off of it and allowing it to be like, you didn't fail. You're just doing it differently. You just need like this more sort of like spark pace rather than like a sustainable, consistent. And some of the advice that people give around sustainable, consistent income and business just wasn't really working for me. It wasn't aligned for me. It wasn't working with my neurotype. It takes time for folks to find you. It takes time to like find your right people and all of that good stuff. And so, you know, ironically, I think it really has started to flow more. Not necessarily at a pace that's like, wow, all my income goals are met. But it is funny that like, as I have this one opportunity, it also means that I'm moving into the next year with, you know, in a very different place where it's like, I had all this abundance of time and now I'm going to have a lot less time. And so I have to kind of figure out what that means for my business and like what my rhythms and routines are, which has been a big emphasis actually in the fall, and what my capacity is with my health. But it gives this playful flavor to it and it gives this more like abundant, emergent energy to it that I really, really am enjoying, and that I've gotten to work with new people towards the end of the year when I really kind of hadn't had a lot of that coming in. I'm having new people discover me, new folks coming to YouTube. Hi, if that's you. It's cool to see like people come in through YouTube, but then like the conventional wisdom, you know, would tell me to do something different. So like just feeling into what it is that is the spark. And so, you know, that final season, the fall season, Ten of Swords. So, you know, I wrapped up my time in North Carolina at the end of October. Unfortunately, health suddenly started getting a lot worse in October, and when I came back here, again, knock on lots of wood, the good news is that mold is remediated, but the bad news is that, you know, my health is just not great. Just is not great. And so it's been challenging, but like I said, I've been changing up a lot of my like routines, organizational systems, working with stuff. You know, it's a chariot year, and so this like cocoon time feels like it's starting to move. I feel like I'm starting to move into my death year, which will start in March, into that emergence of the death card out of the hanged or suspension card. But also there's that chariot collective energy, and there's that like figuring out what are the vehicles that have taken you so far. So for me, I think it's like the specific vision of the business looking away a certain way is a vehicle. I think planning and like control and stuff is like, to some extent, I have to release layers of this every year, but like it's a vehicle. So this Ten of Swords makes me think a lot of that. The idea of releasing perspective, stories, that drama of feeling like stabbed by 10 swords, but then it's like the release, the beauty of it is that once that happens, it's like you're metaphorically dead. You know, there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to go with that perspective that wasn't working. So you're going to have to rely on something other than your logical mind. You're going to have to rely on the other elements of their suits. And so it's interesting to see this like two swords, the way that happened. Totally can feel that energetically, that it's like, ooh, you had these ideas, and you had this idea that like, I think you were clinging to control, even though you thought you weren't clinging to control. But like, it's time to move into something different. And I've been feeling really called to thinking about things like the three intelligences. If you've heard of, you know, the idea of like heart, gut, or body, and mind intelligences. Been doing some like Enneagram work around that, but also just in general, the idea of knowing, and knowing from different parts of the self. And that the mind is often this like future-oriented knowing, and it really wants to know and plan. But the gut and the heart are different. They're oriented differently. And so trusting that like there's things that I can't know until I get there, and there's things that I can't know until they've already happened. The idea of this year behind spread, right, digs into that. And just trusting, like, as I'm moving, that we're gonna figure this shit out. We're gonna build this boat as we're floating it, and that it's okay to even let go of things, perspectives, and ideas that I thought were really spiritual and divine and you know, important and a big shift for me. It's okay to like spiral back through and go, actually, I need a little more financial security. Actually, you know, I thought it was this, and now it's this. So that's the sort of trajectory. I'll be quicker on the other cards, but you know, that was my sort of year in review for you, for folks who are curious. And then, so what the year is planted in my subconscious, hopefully that helps you see, is the Page of Cups reversed. And so like what we've just been talking about, I think it really is that playfulness, that that going deeper. I pulling this card also made me think of the way that I've had some more spiritual playfulness, especially like I started when I was in North Carolina. I started just like coming back into a sense of play when this has been my business and my work, and it's been very like develop a theory, do a thing, you know, work with clients. And I felt more back into the play. I mentioned in the spring, I've been spending more time outside and like being with nature. Then in the fall, I feel like I was, you know, exploring different systems that I wasn't as familiar with, and getting to feel into that like beginner's mind is always really nice. Feeling into, you know, doing like some Enneagram work. I was also doing, I read Benabel Wynn's really awesome I Ching book, and played a little bit with that. Just like, yeah, playing with different perspective, different systems, and then rediscovering things, working more with cards, which I had honestly not been doing that much. All of that felt really good and feels kind of connected to this subconscious, need to play. I think I've also just had some like personal that I won't describe, but like some revelations around like some inner child stuff and some abandoned parts and doing some parts work that I think would resonate there. So hopefully you can see as I'm talking, obviously this is about my journey, storytelling for you a little bit, but also like you can see how I'm taking the things that I know happened and I'm like looking at this card and going, okay, where might that have shown up? And like, what might be present with this? To help me like see some more things. Now, as we go into these other cards, there's a little more of a like transition. So the cycle thing, cycle I started, cycle I completed. I think I've talked enough about things that probably you could guess where I'm going with this, like Ace of Pentacles reversed. I think I do reversals. I have a lot of ways to read reversals, but I think like one way is that there's a depth. Another way, like a really like taking in and internalizing a depth of that element in the ace, because ace is like the whole element. But also sometimes a slowness or a frustration. And I kind of read both of those ways with this reversal, like starting the cycle of, I think, a lot of focus on the material world, the physical world, the body, health is up for me, finance is up for me. These are all very pentacle-y topics. But it's also like another layer of like something I'm very passionate about and do a lot in my work is what is spirituality in the mundane world? What does it mean to like be in your neurotype and like, incorporate like a spiritual perspective to your routines, your habits. It's like day-to-day stuff. But there's like another layer of that in acknowledging that I need to like think about or focus on things like money, things like health, things like, home, etc. So that feels there. And it feels like maybe this could be a cycle of like, I think it would be very funny if like my releasing a lot of the business stuff leads towards growth. It certainly has, in the sense that like I have had like some slight growth in the work that's coming in for me. And I have this opportunity that isn't really related to this business, but like this other opportunity for this year. And it's like, it would be really, really cool if what this means is that I'm trying not to like feel too much into this and to like hope it's this, because we don't want to like set up another like Ten of Swords type story. But like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if like I just needed another year for my business to really like get to the point of sustaining, and this opportunity was something that was like allowing me to do that? That would be beautiful. It would also be way too neat and way too orderly, and probably won't happen that way, but it is a thought I had with that card. And then this Lovers, coming back to the year cards, is kind of interesting because, we had a Lovers year collectively in 2022. And a lot, I felt that, and I also felt that card actually like towards the end of 21. And so the Lovers energy, having been really present and then feeling less present now, totally makes sense. Wrapping up that cycle, I think, I love this Lovers, by the way, this elephant, 2 elephants. Because I think like the Lovers for me, it can bring up a lot of comparison stuff, but it can also bring up like parts of self. And so I think just like a lot around reflection, and projection. And I think that's something that I think like the completing cycle, I can look back and say, oh yeah, no, I think I am projecting a lot less, I think, in certain ways. And I think I'm comparing a lot less. And I think I feel less fragmented, although there's always still going to be work to do. Up at the top, and I'll move these so you can see them. So up at the top, we have, let me just check. Yes, you can see. Okay, great. What I still need to process. So this card, I really like this card. Not this card, but I like this spread position. Because it really feels into the point of doing like reflection at the end of the year, which is just checking in with yourself. What's happened that needs some attention, some work, some processing. Here's a great example of a card that I don't know what the hell that means right now. I just want to model that, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the Ace of Cups reversed would mean. Could be some processing around like scarcity feelings, like literally that cup like feels like it's, you know, water's flowing out. Could be like, yeah, grief and sadness. Could be, I'm not ready to share this, but I had some like very personal, specific news. I'm not going to say any details just because I don't want anybody to figure it out. But don't worry, but it's personal right now. But I had something that happened that I don't think I've really emotionally processed at all. That could be very big and bring a lot of sadness. And so like that could totally be it. But it could also be, you know, some of that mental health stuff. Like there's a lot of things that Ace of Cups can mean. And so what I do with a card like this, where I'm like, is I love the tarot for this. I love that the tarot like gives you this touch point, and it says, you don't know what it means right now, but think, like have this in your back of your mind. So you don't have to like think about it actively. You can forget about it. But I bet you if something really relates to Ace of Cups, I'm gonna be like, oh shit, that was Ace of Cups, right? Ace of Cups reverse. So I just have this in my head. I might put this somewhere actually, like I might put this card up just as a reminder that I'm looking out for like what needs processing. And if I notice things that I'm processing and I'm like, oop, it's that, and there you go. So if you don't know what a card means, I totally love doing that. Put it up in your space or just make a note, mental note. And you will find often that suddenly that card, like the meaning of that card, the energy of that card just starts showing up everywhere. Angle I hadn't considered. So I thought about this. I decided, I was like, do I do finance? Decided to do health, just because I think long-term, like health is so important and such a thing. And like, so in terms of biggest challenge, and it doesn't feel, financial stuff feels like it's potentially resolving, the health stuff feels still pretty uncertain. So I picked that, and I got Queen of Wands reversed. So Queen of Wands reversed was another one that I was like, huh, what angle? And often this position, an angle you haven't considered on the challenge, you won't know what it means because you haven't considered it. I know it's an obvious thing to say, but sometimes when it's something like that or like a subconscious card, I always have to remind myself, you might not get it because you're not supposed to. But yeah, I don't know. Queen of Wands are like, I thought maybe it was something about like capacity, energetic capacity, the possibilities of the potential of the poor health, but then also like I didn't want to kind of code it over with something. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what this is. I did think about the whole like health, meaning I was in a physical space where for whatever reason I felt more energetic creativity. That's a possibility, but I'm just gonna sit with that one. And then finally we had the medicine and the gift. So the medicine was Knight of Wands. That feels very like, that makes a lot of sense because I think I've been healing my relationship to effort and work, and I'm sure I'll do videos about this. With ADHD, I think I have a lot of just like shadow stuff around effort, work, feeling, as a human design generator. I have a lot to say about this topic, so I'm not going to talk about it a lot here, but I'll just say that made sense. Like, there's a lot around just what it means to be in flow, to be in flow that like requires work. And what does work mean? And does work have to be effortful? Lots of little questions like that. I think as I'm moving into a year as well, where it's like, you know, maybe the medicine is like having the space to kind of work with that like in my head, because now I'm moving into a year where I might have to be doing like 20-30 hours of sustained work again while in poor health. I'm like, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that feel? But also like realizing it's possible. And that's something with the magician as well, is like, if I think about it too much, often it's like, oh my God, I can't do it again. And then when I start doing it, I'm like, oh shit, I can do this. So my capacity has actually been more than I thought it would be in a lot of cases. And that's been a really interesting like revelation. I spent a lot of time talking about permission to rest, which is so important. It's very important. I don't want to like minimize that. But also sometimes we want to move and we want to work and we want to, and like work isn't always capitalist. Work isn't always exploitative. What did I read recently about healing? Shoot, I wish I could remember. I read something about healing your relationship to work that I was like, man, this is really important. Oh, maybe it was actually, the Brown sisters. I think on their podcast, it may have been this. Brown sisters did a series on love, but right before that, they did an episode. I'm referring to Adrienne Marie and Autumn Brown's amazing podcast, How to Survive the End of the World. Recommend a lot if you haven't checked it out. This was probably a year or more ago because I'm way behind, but I listened to it a few months ago. episode about, so it would be the episode right before the love series. There was an episode about work, and they talked about healing your relationship to work from an anti-capitalist radical perspective. Highly recommend, great podcast. Resonates with that card. And finally the gift, Knight of Pentacles reversed. I don't know, I need to say anything about this. Slow the motherfucker down. Feels very related to suspension. Just slowing down. Being present. Moving at the pace of my admittedly deteriorating body. So, with love. So that was my spread. I hope that, that was a deep dive. That was a long conversation. I hope you had some beverage. It's my tea. But I haven't done a catch up or anything on this video, on this channel in a while. I haven't really talked about my personal stuff in a while, and sometimes people enjoy that. So if that's you, you just got it. Yeah, I'd love to hear in the comments about any reflections you have, thoughts on the cards I talked about this kind of practice, about your year, whatever you want to share with me. I'd love to hear it. I'd also love it if you checked out my newsletter, link below, because that's where you're going to find out when there's stuff coming up, and not just on this channel, but elsewhere, and free resources, discounts, early access to things, you name it, it's there. Check out the newsletter, and I wish you a beautiful, wonderful, and restful, and workful, if that's what you need, 2024, and we'll see you in the next video.